Hello and welcome. My name is Carol Carter and I'm the founder and CEO of Global Minded. Global Minded is dedicated to creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented populations, and all manner of diversity into the education, economic mobility, and leadership pipeline. We do that in a number of different ways, one of which is these monthly equity events, which we have in STEM, health, technology, higher education, K-12. And they're led by leaders of color with a lot of diverse people who are our panelists sharing all kinds of different perspectives. So that's one piece. Another is we have a daily newsletter that features role models of people who have beat the odds. Many of them are first gen to college, minoritized, or graduates who are from poverty affected backgrounds. And then we have an annual conference every year, which we will be live this year. We've been virtual for the last 2 years, and that'll be June 22nd, 23rd, 24th in Denver. Our early bird rate is available right now. Our call for proposals is open right now. And we also invite those of you who are working with first gen or poverty affected or minoritized students to bring 1 or 2 delegates from your institutions to Global Minded, and those students will meet other students and be able to network at this event as well. Finally, we have these Inclusive Leader Awards every year, and we just had the event a week ago, and we'll be putting the link to that in the chat, and we'll also send that after the session. So we are recording the session, and following this, we will be sharing it with each of you so that you can also share this out with your networks. So it is my pleasure to introduce Paula Garcia Todd, who is a passionate advocate and leader in the pharmaceutical technologies area. She's made significant contributions in drug delivery through her work at Dow Chemical, DuPont, and now IFF for the past 18 years. Her vast experiences range from process engineering and manufacturing settings with small and large molecule active pharmaceutical ingredients to researching and creating patented polymer innovations to solve critical formulation issues for pharmaceutical companies around the world. She holds a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science in Chemical Engineering from Pennsylvania State University, and she and her husband Doug have 3 children and live in Georgia. She's originally from Brazil and speaks Portuguese and Spanish fluently. Paula, welcome, and welcome to all of your panelists on this very important topic about allies in diversity in STEM.
Carol, as always, thank you so much for allowing us to have this space, to have these important conversations, especially when it comes to equity in STEM. Thank you so much, Carol. I am so excited for today's panel. Thank you all for joining us today. Today, we're going to talk about allyship, and I think that's something that's applicable for a lot of people in a lot of different settings. So I'm really, really excited, and we have an amazing group of panelists today. So let me give them the space to introduce themselves, and then we'll go into the questions. Please keep in mind that we welcome your questions as we go through this panel. So please feel free to use the chat, ask us questions. We're happy to respond to any questions that you may have as well. So let's get started. I'm going to let Anthony introduce himself first. Oh, you're on mute.
Got it. Sorry about that. Thank you, Paula. Appreciate it. So my name's Anthony Newton. I've pretty much spent most of my career in Fortune 150. Prior to that, I was in the military. So today, my comments will probably be riddled with thoughts around the military. And if you run into individuals and you think of it, allyship there, that's really my background. So currently I'm doing a consulting role in my own company. And my background from studies was economics and then statistics and masters. I'm also pursuing a second master still in data science today. And I continue to be in the product management role for security right now specifically. So I think that's enough.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anthony. All right. Next on my screen is Indara. Could you introduce yourself as well? Yes.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Indara Suarez. I am a assistant professor in physics, and I work, I'm an experimental particle physicist, and I work at the Large Hadron Collider. I think my trajectory has been very non-traditional. I started by not graduating from high school, went to community college, then transferred to UCLA, and then took some time off and did a post-bac program, then went to grad school. And then in that series of in that trajectory, I also participated in many programs aimed at improving the underrepresentation of women and minorities in STEM. So I think my perspective is more on academia. And also I've just been trying to, learn from what I went through and try to implement some changes at Boston University to help students that come from similar backgrounds.
Yeah, I think your story is more common than you think. And so I think you're bringing an amazing perspective to our conversation today. And I love that you are a physics major, because finding women that study physics is so, so difficult. So we're really happy to have you here. Okay, up next, we've got Sheryl.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Burgstahler, come from the University of Washington here. I have kind of a varied background. My academic background is in education, mathematics, and computer science. So I'm a female in a male-dominated fields of math and computer science. Certainly, back when I first thought about allies, when I was a young person, the only allies and mentors I had were men. And I remember the exact moment when I met a female that was a role model in the area that I was interested in. And it was Grace Hopper. When she was still alive. She gave a talk here in Seattle, and I remember sitting in the audience and thinking, I've never seen a woman do something that I'm doing or thinking of doing. But anyway, so they don't necessarily have to be looking just like us or be like us to be a good ally or mentor, but still, my teaching experience go back to middle school and high school and college and university work now. I still teach online. In particular, I have a focus on making accessible online learning particularly for students with a wide variety of disabilities. I direct the Accessible Technology Services Center, where we make sure that the technology here at the university that we procure, develop, and use is accessible to people with disabilities. And so that's my specific focus. I started the Do It Center, Disabilities, Opportunities, Internetworking, and Technology back in 1992 because I wanted to do more because of my personal professional interest in working with people with disabilities beyond assistive technology. And so I started writing grants. And so I fund the Do It Center with grants primarily from the National Science Foundation. So we do a lot of STEM work, and broadly speaking, we're directly helping students with disabilities get prepared for college and careers and succeed when they're there and transition to employment. And we make sure that technology is always one of their empowering tools in that process. But then we work with institutions and faculty and staff and so forth. And then we're promoting universal design, where all products and environments are designed in such a way that they're inclusive of people with disabilities. Doesn't rule out accommodations. We just don't need to rely on them quite so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sheryl. And I do know that you certainly have a couple books under your belt, and you've taught me a lot about inclusion. So thank you so much for all the work that you do. And last but certainly not least, I have Helen, who is actually a fellow If Then ambassador sister of mine.
Great. I just want to say really quickly, did you notice the chat that Indara is also Dr. Indara Suarez? Okay, great. That was seen. Okay, so my name is Helen Tran. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto. I just started in January, actually. And, before coming here, I was working at Stanford as a postdoc a really long time, especially with COVID. And before that, I did my PhD in chemistry at Columbia. And well, wow, it's been so long, but I guess before that, I did my undergraduate at Berkeley. So a little bit about my research is I work on stretchable electronics and thinking about how to make electronics conformable with the body, make them, interact with us in a way that's harmonious and maybe improve our human wellness as well. I guess when I was younger, I had no idea what a chemist was or university or the difference between undergraduate and graduate school. My mom went to middle school and my dad went to high school. So, I didn't really have role models when I was younger. And it was actually these sort of outreach types of events that came to my high school and was like, you know what, you should apply to college, Helen. I was like, okay, I will do that. And then, I was very lucky. My first mentor was actually Filipino, and he was like, oh, I'm going to help you throughout graduate school, and encourage me to apply to a lot of different things. And I was really excited about graduate school, but my dad became very ill, so I actually had to take 2 years off, and I did a post-bac. And then eventually I was able to continue on to graduate school. And so I also come from the perspective of academia, like Indara, but I've had like these socioeconomic struggles that I think a lot of my peers don't have. So I like to bring these perspectives in to where I am now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Helen. I'm so appreciative of your time here as well. So thank you all. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So we want to talk about allies. Let's just start off by defining what an ally is. So I'm going to let Anthony, maybe you can give us some insight on how do you define an ally?
So once again, I'm not going to answer it necessarily directly like that, but it's coming from my experiences. When I was a youngster coming out of high school, when I joined the military, I went straight to Japan and lived there for 3 years. In total, I spent 8 years in the military and then worked. I've been working in Fortune 150s for about 20 years now. And the reason I bring that up is that veterans are, when you're thinking of veterans in terms of allies, they're very unique in the sense that they're not going to trust someone right out of the gates until they've proven themselves to be reliable, be loyal, and willing to stand by you. So as you run into folks out there that may have been in the military, the old joke in the military was, how do you know your friend is someone who will help you move? A best friend is someone who will help you move a body. Now, I say that facetiously because that kind of just underlies the mentality of what veterans come to the table with. And the thing that's always interested me is in the military, where you're paid a fraction of what we make in the civilian world, the person on your left and the person on your right is willing to die for you. And in the corporate world, the person on your left and right, or you're willing to lay off the person on your left and right in order to get a bonus. And so you've got to think about that mentality, because when you're dealing with a veteran, you're going to have to earn their trust to be an ally. You're going to have to be consistent. And ultimately, when you think about an ally from the military or those kinds of backgrounds, they're going to take more energy. But when you do, you're never going to have a better ally who will stand by you through thick and thin. So it's just something to think about, a little nuance. Obviously, I don't come from the academic world like the other panelists here, but veterans will bring a lot to the table. They're very loyal. You're just going to have to earn their trust.
Yeah, that's a really, really great insight that you're bringing that I think a lot of people haven't encountered. So I really appreciate that. Helen, do you have any other additions of how you would define an ally?
When I think about being an ally, I try to be very careful about what I do to consider myself an ally, right? And I think being an ally means you have to put effort and time, right? So I think on one side, you can be like, yes, I'm an ally, I support A, B, C, D, but when the time comes where you actually need to put effort in, you need to stand up, you need to put your time and potentially your reputation on the line, right? That's really part of being an ally. It's not just saying something. So I guess being an ally does require work as well.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So So as we talk about allyship, let's focus a little bit in particular about diversity in STEM. So what do you think is the role and the impact of an ally when it comes to diversity in STEM? And I'm going to start with Indara.
Yeah, so I think I actually really like what Anthony said because I feel like that is like my everyday encounter. It takes work to be an active ally. And I think that we have to think about, what is the purpose of diversity, right? Is it just that we're trying to achieve visual diversity, or are we really trying to achieve diversity of thought and experience? And I think for most of us that have gone through those economic struggles and academic struggles and, different types of encounter different types of barriers, we are aware that what we really want is to have diversity in experience, diversity in skills, right? Because we understand that people that have different perspectives, they can bring in something new to the table to address, scientific problems. So I think for me, what is the most important thing as an ally to the students that I deal with is just actively creating an environment where they can learn, where they can gain skills, where they can do research. I think that one thing that I really promote with my students is like the way to achieve diversity is actually through research, because a lot of the barriers are actually coming from that feeling of like not being included, from that lack of representation in sciences. Like in physics and math, it's like basically the history of old white men, and so, and I'm not even talking about like gender diversity at that point, right? But I think that creating that space for my students to not just, feel comfortable being part of a community, something that they're used to back home, but also to be productive members of the science of the department. They automatically belong because they are producing science. So I think that, a lot of these efforts can get very overshadowed by like good intentions type of actions. But the reality is that the only way we're ever going to achieve diversity is if we create space for students and for people to basically end up occupying spaces of privilege like academia and industry.
Yeah, that response is right on. That was beautifully said. Thank you for that. And I'm curious, it just spurred some different thoughts for me. I don't know, Sheryl, do you have anything to add to that? I feel like you could probably add a little bit to the whole thought of the role and the impact, especially in diversity in STEM.
Yeah, as I said, I specialize in students with disabilities, so I'll kind of go along that line. And one thing to kind of counter that a bit, I think exactly what you said was right on, but also not to leave out people in the majority to be allies to someone in the minority. For instance, students with disabilities often don't have a lot of role models and won't for at least some time, particularly in a field that they're looking to go into. And the group of people with disabilities is so diverse in itself that they might find someone with a different type of disability. And too often, I think in my experiences with programs with people with disabilities is they match up a person who's blind with a person who's blind. And that can be extremely limiting and really stretch mentor possibilities too thin. And we actually don't do that. And I encourage allies to remember that maybe one of the most important things, besides being reliable, things that have already been said, is to listen. You don't have to become a person with a disability or a woman or whatever to understand what they're saying. You'll never live in their shoes, but you wouldn't with someone who had the same demographic that you have anyway. And so to listen is the important thing, and that you're helping maybe that person do their own problem solving, that you're helping them answer their questions, solve their problems, but using resources to do that. And you happen to be a resource as well. And also having the perspective of the majority population. I know I grew up during the women's movement, and I think one of the mistakes as a group was made in many times is leaving the men out. well, we're just gonna get these women together. And I remember one group, they wanted to become give a talk at their event about women in computer science. And I told them, and I really offended them, by the way, I'm not sure it was the right thing to do, but I knew that they wouldn't allow men to come to their meetings or be part of their organization. And I said, if you choose to be more inclusive and allow men to be part of this, I will come and talk. And they turned me down, and I never heard from them again. But I thought it was an important point. It's just like the good old boy, nonprofit organizations and clubs and so forth that only serve men and so forth. But there are certainly people without disabilities that can be allies. And also to remember that people have experiences maybe with a particular underrepresented group, but they're not necessarily part of that group. My husband had a disability. He was paraplegic. He actually died due to cancer, which caused his paralysis was actually caused from the treatment of cancer. So I have a great deal of very, very personal experiences with disability, but I don't have one myself. And there are other people out there who have a child with a disability or whatever. So anyway, to think more broadly about what the characteristics of an ally could be, both from the ally side and from the person that is looking for an ally.
That is an excellent, excellent point. I mean, it just proves the point that we can all be allies in some way or shape or form.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Helen, did you have something to add?
Yeah, like listening to Sheryl talk sort of just reminded me the idea of universal design, just because you might not have a disability, but if we design it in a way that is inclusive to everyone, it actually improves everybody's happiness, right? So kind of like curb cuts were originally designed for people who had to move in wheelchair, but now like I use curb cuts all the time when I push my cart for a grocery store or my bike and stuff like that. So I think this is something a lot of people forget, that if you try to implement inclusive practices and things to increase a certain group of people's sense of belonging, that it's only specific to that group. It's actually probably going to improve everybody's experience as well. And I think thinking about universal design is a good reminder that more diversity leads to more innovation, as Indara said, and better human health and wellness for everyone.
Yeah,
and I love that.
Along those lines, really thinking through intersectionality as well. I work with some groups that focus on racial ethnic minorities, and it's very segmented, as we all know, siloed, and I can understand there are special needs of these various groups. But what I hear from students with disabilities, if they're from one of those minoritized groups, they do not feel welcome because the group that's working with the Black students doesn't feel equipped to have a Black student with a disability in that group. And so really being careful about discriminating against subgroups of the group that we're targeting.
Yeah, I'd make
Sorry. Go ahead.
I'd like to just make one comment on that too. And Sheryl, I liked how you talked about just listening, right? The reason I think it's important is that when you think of being an ally, everybody has something to give. But the real root of being an ally or a mentor or coach is that you're going to have to want to help others. And what people, I believe, are seeking today, regardless of what anything that they're facing, is they want authenticity. If you're authentic and you're truly and genuinely wanting to help somebody, Sheryl, just like you said, it could be as simple as just listening. So don't get wrapped around the actuals. My advice to folks of worrying about all the little details. At the end, if your heart's in this and you want to be a true ally to somebody and you're authentic, that's going to overshadow any obstacles that you'll have in that relationship, in my opinion.
Absolutely. That is beautiful. Indara, did you have something else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Cheryl's saying is really important, because the reality is that there's not enough people of color. There's not enough people of like that particular identity, whatever that identity is, to represent everyone in the places where we are trying to bring up diversity. And so, and I think something that, we don't think about a lot is that when we talk about imposter syndrome and things like this, it's like everyone experiences a certain level of, in these fields, in academia and STEM, right? Because they are hard fields. And I think, thinking about intersectionality, like that's all really important. When we try, like, I think someone mentioned, I think it was maybe Helen, that all of your mentors were men. For me, all my mentors were, oh, it was Sheryl, sorry. Yeah, and so I think one thing I would say to students, just reiterating what Sheryl said, is that you can find a mentor, you can find an ally in people, you know, that don't look like you, because we all have some sort of personal struggle. And as long as they're willing to be an ally, that's all you really need. So, you know, I think I didn't mean to focus so much on, you know, ethnicity, but, you know, for us in physics, like basically anyone who is not a rich old white dude is underrepresented, right? So I think that there's a lot of, you know, there's that community I'm talking about is including, you know, all kinds of people. And like it was said, you know, the whole point, and I think this is something I've been appreciating more and more lately by watching my students, you know, interact with each other, is that we all come up together. You know, we don't step on each other to step over. That's what we really should be, you know, trying to promote.
Yeah, I love where this conversation has gone. I think we've covered a lot of really impactful topics all under this topic. But I'm curious if we talk about allies really as being a noun, like as being a person. And I really like to think of allyship as being a verb, as we've talked about, like it takes a lot of doing and it takes a lot of action, right? So I don't know, Helen, if you have any more thoughts about the idea of really turning ally, kind of turning it from a noun into a verb. What does that take?
I mean, it takes a lot of time and effort, and sometimes a little bit of reputation, or you're worried about that. And I'll say a story, kind of what's happened to me is like, I work in a chemistry building that's probably from the 70s. So there's not a woman's restroom on every floor. And, you know, my students were, you know, we all noticed it, and I could have just done nothing, right? But I decided to sort of speak up, which is very intimidating for me because I just joined this department, and the first thing I'm going to do is say, excuse me, there's not enough women's restroom on this floor. And it was very, I know it's sort of silly the way I'm painting it, but it was scary for me because I was like, how are my colleagues, who are predominantly men, going to view me? Are they going to no longer take me seriously? And these are sort of issues that I was worried about in terms of my career, but I also wanted to create an inclusive environment for my students and I. And so deciding to push for these gender neutral restrooms was something I decided to do. And it required effort, you know, sitting into meetings to suggest it, and a little bit of courage, I guess. But it's something that a lot of people took very favorably, but I was sort of worried about that. It does take effort. I think that's something that many of us need to do if we want to be a true ally.
Absolutely. And that's a great example of allyship, really, at, you know, at work. Indara, did you have anything to add to the concept of turning the word ally from a noun into a verb?
No, I think Helen, you know, I completely agree with what she said. I think it does take a lot of, again, just from personal experiences recently, I've been thinking about how important it is to be an active ally as opposed to just someone that is there willing to help when it pops up, like, you know, actually seeking opportunities to include some of my coworkers into different initiatives that I'm working out on and things like this. I think that sort of allyship, and again, it's a lot from observing my students, like how they go out of their way to help people. And I think I do that a lot in my personal life, but in my professional life, I've always had these like boundaries, you know, and I think I'm starting to understand more how important it is to, you know, also build that community where you're actively seeking opportunities to collaborate, you know, seeking opportunities to help the whole crowd go forward.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so Sheryl, I'm going to go back to you because earlier you talked about the importance of how you don't necessarily have to identify with a particular group of people to be an ally. So I'd love to hear from you thoughts on how do we recruit or create allies around us?
I've been reflecting on that a bit before this panel today, and where do these people come from? And we recruit. Most people call them mentors in our program, but they do a lot of things that allies would do. But pretty much everywhere. I do think if it's a program like ours, it's best if you can hand select them. And by meeting someone and thinking they would be a good mentor or ally or whatever, and giving them a specific role to play. And it doesn't have to be so specific that each one is unique, but something they're supposed to be doing. Like we'll have a group of them that are in our online mentoring community. They're just kind of floating. They're students. There's conversations going on or whatever. We don't match them up one-on-one initially. And we like those kind of relationships to evolve over time, because we want the mentors to just share with all the group and so forth. And so anyway, but one thing we found too is you have to give them, if you're bringing in someone that you're recruiting, you have to give them some training or guidance, whatever you want to call it, checklist on things to do, because they're very sometimes quite uncomfortable. Like, well, what do I talk to about? These kids, they all have disabilities, I know, and they're in high school or college, but what do I want to talk about? Well, we first of all say let the students lead. They often pose questions. I'm going to be in a job interview or an internship interview. Should I disclose my disability? And if so, when? That's a complicated topic. Personal choices get involved and so forth. And so it's important to have a diverse set of answers to that question. So there is no right answer to that about yes or no first, but then also when. And so it leads to an interesting conversation. And then the allies or mentors can engage in the conversation with the proteges, if you might want to call them that. And there's no real distinction between the two. It's a group conversation. We think of it, the formation is like a family. You've got Uncle Joe, who knows about this employment because he works at Boeing. And then you've got Aunt Sarah, who's a teacher, and you get to know these people. And then you kind of know who you might go to for a particular question. And so I recruit allies at conferences. People might be giving a talk, or people I meet. And then we make sure our application's on the website. And so I can just tell them where to find that. And then that's real clear what we're looking for, and they can fill out this application. But I also make the application process fairly simple. And we ask for a reference, but if I know the person, I say, you can list me as a reference. And that kind of encourages them to join us, shows I have confidence in them, but also makes the application more streamlined. So I think you should look at a lot of different places and think about the diversity that you would like to have in the mentorship pool, not necessarily the characteristics of any one person. We have a lot of mentors, allies who have disabilities, and that's great. That's really wonderful that we have people with disabilities that are out there in jobs and doing stuff that the younger students would like to do. But then some do not, and some have deep expertise in academic areas like computer science and other STEM fields. And others are employment. And so there are just lots of different diversity characteristics. If you just went through all types of characteristics, we have a little of probably each of the major ones.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Anthony, what are your thoughts on how we can recruit or create allies?
Yeah, I kind of bifurcate the world into that in terms of at work or outside of work, and understanding that they both bleed into each other. So I often recommend to anyone that inside the firm, no matter what your job is initially, you should have an ally, a mentor inside the company, at least one. Depending on your role in the firm, that could be more. If you're in sales or product marketing, you're going to need more. And I also recommend, though, that you have a mentor / ally outside the firm. So you have two opinions, one of which is very neutral, and then one that understands the culture and the politics and everything that's going on. So inside the firm, I encourage folks to really look at any company sponsored programs or affiliations, events type thing that other employees will be congregating at. That can include not-for-profit work. I think that's very important. Don't forget also the drinks or activities, whatever that is after work, shows that you're committed to the team. And, you don't necessarily have to go every time, but you want to get to know everybody and share information about yourself. Now, outside the firm, I have a couple little secrets that I don't know if will resonate, but they sure have worked for me. First is the gym. If you have a gym, often you're going to run into someone there over time with a consistent schedule. You'll start to say hi, and then one day you'll introduce yourself. Don't forget, it may not always be the person you're looking for. It could be a spouse, significant other, and they'll say, oh, well, I know so-and-so. So don't forget the gym. And then my last big secret is the coffee shop. So especially a cafe, if you're consistent, let me tell you, waitresses know everybody and everything that's going on. I have sold cars. I have bought things just by a waitress telling me so-and-so is looking for this, that, or the other. And you also meet people there as well that you'd be surprised where they're coming from. So those are a couple thoughts for where to recruit.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking for, I think, Helen, you had such a great story about, a way where you really showed allyship. I'm curious if anyone else has any strong examples of allyship, and in particular, what type of impact this may have had on any underrepresented students or professionals around them. Indara, do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, I think like what I'm doing with my students right now, I've been just actively recruiting students into my research group who are, either low income or first generation, underrepresented minorities, women. I think my group is strangely majority women. For physics, that is very strange. Helen's like, I don't believe it.
No, I'm saying I don't think it's strange. I think they're attracted to you. That's why you are their inspiration and you're the source of light that they're moving towards you. It's the same with my group. It's majority women as well. So
yeah, so I think that something that I've gotten to know these students. I recruited them earlier on in their undergraduate, and now they're going off to do like fellowships, and they're getting fellowships and going off to do fancy undergraduate research experiences at places like Caltech. But I think what I've noticed is, I think some of the students that are coming to my group, they're not necessarily, because there's the students I've been actively recruiting with that consciousness of trying to increase diversity. But then there's the other students that come into my group where maybe their diversity is not as visual or as apparent, and so I think I've noticed that what the community that the group has to offer, me and my postdocs are just actively trying to mentor these students, that has created something to them, for them, that includes them into the physics department. Whereas, it's common that some of these students might not be part of the regular, physics groups, like the student groups that, like the Society of Physics Students, right? They might not be attending those type of meetings, but yet they show up here on Friday or when we have events. And I think that, while we started thinking about, just a particular set of students, it has turned out that that what we are providing for the overall department, I think has some benefits to other students that maybe we did not think about originally. I don't know if that sort of describes it, but it's been really nice to see the students succeed. And like I said, it's particularly impressive how, like, before I had to like bribe them to come together to study, like, I'll buy you pizza if you study together. But now it's like that stuff is happening more genuinely. And I think that's really nice to see.
Yeah, that's wonderful. You've created an amazing environment there.
I could add
Anthony,
one more, if I could add one more thing
yes,
to
of
that, it
course.
just reminded us that that was a great story, and I have a good story as well. And kind of along those lines is we actually intentionally create mentors or allies, actually more than mentors, actually within our community. We have these students with teenagers with disabilities and young adults in our summer programs during the summer, so they're all together as a group. And we will go on field trips, like to a science center or whatever sometimes. And I have them observe how accessible the center is and how what improvements can be made for themselves and their peers, the other people that are in the group. And then they have to kind of write this up to say, how is it accessible to you or not, blah, blah, blah. And what did you notice about some of your peers, whether they had accessibility problems? And then what recommendations would you make in a very positive way? And they can't do that because of the nature of our program, but we follow up, the staff follows up. We'll take some of these summaries and we'll meet with that group, the Pacific Science Center, whatever, and share with them this input that's very positive. It has to be very positive and constructive in order for them to be adequate, make this assignment an objective. And they do, but the idea there too is to get information to those organizations, and we tell the students with the feedback, and they can see year after year improvements have been made because of their recommendations. So they get that positive reinforcement, but also they learn how to advocate for one another, which is unusual in the disabled community. Because if you grow up as a student who's blind, you may know other students who are blind, but you don't know a lot of students who have learning disabilities or attention deficits or on the autism spectrum or have physical disabilities. And that's true across the board. And they actually, it's interesting because they actually take some pride in it. You'll find them starting to advocate for one another. So, well, I don't think that's going to be accessible to a blind person. and they really buy into it. And I know they really do, because their parents tell me later that they're so sensitive to the needs of other students with disabilities, or the disabilities are different than their own.
Yeah, what an impactful story. That's really, really great. Thank you so much for sharing. Anthony, do you have any examples of allyship?
Yeah, I've got several, but I'm going to do a shameless plug, and that's the allyship between Microsoft alum and global minded. So along my stops, I worked at Microsoft in the 90s and left there in 2001. And roughly 5 years ago, established the third chapter of the Microsoft alum around the world. So that's based out of Colorado. And now we have chapters all over the world, but I'm the chapter lead or chapter president for Microsoft alum. And one of the things I wanted to do in the community is to create a relationship where we're giving back in some way to the community. And so fast forward, Carol and Global Minded created, I think, a great allyship and working together where we match Microsoft alum with first generation students, meaning students that haven't had family members go to college before. And when I first thought of that, I just thought, man, if I only had that coming out of college, somebody that had already been in the trenches, been there, done that, and, has a perspective that's, aged, if you will, with decades in the trenches in these corporations. So right now, I think we're roughly between 20, 25 mentor mentees. We're just getting started. I think there's a huge opportunity to grow that number, as well as extend it into the current Microsoft employees as well. So that, I think, is a great example of when I mentioned earlier about where do you find allyships. And I mentioned not-for-profit or company-sponsored programs. That's the sort of thing I was alluding to. So I feel very optimistic about the work we're doing. I think we're just getting started. But I'd also just say it's a great way to give back. And I think students that are in that program are going to gain a lot over time. So that's my shameless plug, but I'll take it there.
And Anthony, thank you. I'll just insert really quickly that in addition to first gen, this is especially for, for Sheryl and some others, that we're also looking at students who are poverty affected or minoritized in any way. So it could be ability status, it could be LGBTQIA. We're looking across all the different people who need to be at the table, but maybe are not at the table or whose voices are not heard. And we're seeing that powerful impact of that professional mentor, especially when we can use technology, which Anthony's spearheading with some folks from Salesforce, to match people who match in 3 or 4 different areas. So of how they identify. So just put that in there.
Thank you for expanding there, Carol. I appreciate that. That's great comment.
That was a really great example. And I think it leads really well to another question I had. And I also noticed, Helen, you popped into the chat to answer a question. How do you think allies could function as mentors or sponsors? Do you have any thoughts on that, Helen?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like I went from a student who in some ways maybe is relating to the least experience, least power dynamics, right? And now that I'm a professor. And so what I suggested was that if you feel that you are, the youngest person or something like that, and you may not be taken seriously, you should find a senior ally or someone who will sponsor and amplify your voice. I think that's something that I was able to do as a graduate student as well as a postdoctoral scholar, and that's what I now try to do as for my students and other graduate students as well. I am also now, the youngest professor in the department. So I sometimes still feel like I'm the one with the least experience, but even within my department, I've sort of found people who really supported me. So kind of like what Sheryl was saying, that they don't necessarily need to be a woman to support my initiatives, but yeah, my chair, Bob Beatty, has really been supportive in what I did. So, even though I'm playing the role where I'm supporting younger folks, I'm also finding my own senior mentors and senior sponsors to help me out as well.
That's great. Thank you. What about you, Indara? Do you have any thoughts about how allies could also function as a mentor or a sponsor?
Yeah, I think what Sheryl and Anthony and Helen have now mentioned is, and it's making me realize, like, what we have been doing is creating a whole set of new allies in the people that we work with, right? So I think that, by showing by example and creating those spaces to allow that to happen, we are promoting mentorship. And so I think that, I do sometimes tell my students and postdocs that mentorship is important, but I think that it's become such a culture of the group that, they just see it as like, this is part of what we do, right? We just mentor each other, and that mentorship, like, is needed like throughout the different stages of your career. So I always do, tell my students that I still talk to a lot of my previous supervisors, previous mentors. And I think up to when I was a student, I would, every year I would just send out a email of like, what am I up to lately, to the people that had helped me in the past, because I do think that, when you're a person with disabilities, you're a person of color, you're a woman, you get overlooked a lot. And so the people that see you and the people that say, hey, you're not fitting into the perfect box, but they still help you. And, I think those people, I feel like they are a big reason of why I am where I am and why I've been able to get the opportunities that I have. And so that's why it's so important to give back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you brought up some really good points. And I love that what you're also doing with your students is you're creating this community of trust and mentorship amongst themselves, which, to your point, will do really well in the professional world as well. So, your students are going to learn how to create that community for themselves as well. So that's fantastic. All right, Sheryl, I have a question for you around, what are your thoughts on how someone can become a better ally?
Become a better ally. I think it's good from the ally's point of view to think about all the strengths you have. It's really easy to think of all the things you can't do for this person. They go, their path is different than mine, so what can I say? But think about the strengths that you have. It could be in your family, could be in your community connections, could be your academic background, your career path. And it might not be something that anybody would particularly look to you for. Knowing a little bit about me, you wouldn't know as a student, a potential person I could be an ally for wouldn't know that I used to teach middle school, for example. And so you need to kind of just think about those strengths you have, even they're from way back. That was an important part of my life. And so I have a lot of feelings about that, and very positive, by the way. But anyway, which is not always the case in middle school, but it was positive for me. And so, really looking at yourself periodically and thinking about the strengths that you have, so you don't get so overwhelmed, particularly if you're going to become an ally to a student with disability. You can get overwhelmed with the muscular dystrophy or blindness or whatever. It's so overwhelmed, you can't even think of what you have to offer. Well, those students have interests and have career ideas and so forth too. And so it's also important to recognize things you don't know, and realize that people get that from somewhere else. Assistive technology is a good one for faculty. Is they probably think some may think they have to know a lot about assistive technology if they're working with a student with disabilities. Well, not exactly. For one thing, ask the student what technology they use. I mean, if they've gone as far to college, they probably know what assistive technology they need, and they probably have it. But what they don't have and would be useful, then you could find ways to advocate for that for them. And so advocacy is so important, where, well, gee, why don't we have that technology here on campus? This would benefit the student, and figure out, well, who makes those decisions and who does what? And the student's not gonna be able to do that very effectively, but you can. So really building on your strengths. And like I said before, being proactive and reaching out to the students. And that was mentioned, I think, before as well. Sending them a quick email, just checking in. How are you doing? Sometimes students feel like they're interrupting you. They don't want to bother you. I work with students, they just want to apologize all the time. I'm sorry if I waste your time. Well, they're in my class, they pay tuition. It's like, they should get all they can for their buck there. And so you as the ally need to realize that other people might feel that way, because it's always, even now, it's surprising to me when people feel that way, that they're wasting my time. What do they think I do? This is a job that I have after all. And I really like that. So you have to be proactive. You have to think of your own strengths. You have to listen to the student, as I mentioned earlier, and wait to plug in. And when you see things they're interested in doing, what are you thinking about doing? What challenges do you think you might have in pursuing this? And then you can also think about, what are other people I know at the university or in the employment setting? Who do I know that might be able to then help with some of the issues that particular person is facing, that you're not going to know about unless you ask them and listen to them?
Yeah, I think listening is very much key. I would agree with that. Anthony, do you have any thoughts on how someone can become a better ally?
Yeah, just a few things there. I would say, first off, being an ally or wanting to become a better ally means you're going to be giving something of yourself, as I mentioned earlier. So in my mind, you really got to focus your mindset on the we versus me, right? This is about we, not about you or me. And that's where the authenticity comes in. If you're showing up and not present in whatever setting, people are going to smell that a mile away. They're going to smell when you're not being authentic or invested in truly giving everything you've got. So I would say, first, get your mindset focused on we, not me. I also call it keeping score in your head. So I look at it this way, in that keep score in your head of how many times you're helping somebody versus asking for help. And I try to use a 5-to-1 rule, where I'm going to help someone some way, somehow, 5 times before I'm going to ask for more help. You want that balance to always be you giving as much or more than you can than you're taking, right? So there will be times that you'll want help, and when that time comes, you will get it, given as much as you do. I would also say that your word matters a lot. And so if you say you're going to do something, be sure to do it. You got to prioritize that, because that reflects on your reputation. And as Sheryl mentioned, your network touches a lot of people. If you think of LinkedIn, there's a lot of connections there, and your reputation matters. So if you say you're going to do something, do it, because your word does matter. And then I'd say last, be humble. Be as helpful and as supportive as much as you can, but just because you help somebody doesn't ever mean they owe you anything. And I think that,
Yeah, very powerful thought. Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much.
Right.
Okay, so I'm looking at time we only got 5 minutes left. So I'm going to ask if anybody has any examples where they have been an ally. So I think, Helen, you showed a great one. I don't know if you have any other ones to share, but where have you stepped in and been an ally for maybe even someone who doesn't quite identify exactly like you? Where have you stepped in to help? Any examples? Yeah, go ahead, Ellen.
Again, kind of going back to the effort aspect, I think one thing that I made a personal goal was to help people that I felt were very promising for academic positions, and to spend time and work with them on their proposal. And then importantly, once they got their offers, I really worked closely with them to negotiate, to make sure that these people, who are typically historically excluded and maybe are not getting the best deal, really got the most. So I'll be like, look, this is the number I heard from this person, so you need to ask that exact number. And then that took a lot of time and effort and was no value in some ways to me, because it wasn't getting me any money. But I think it was something that I felt was important, so that my new peers are getting all the resources that they need to succeed.
Super powerful example and very relevant across the board in all industries. That is amazing. Sheryl, did you have something to share?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about being an ally to individuals that we might encounter or try to encounter. But there's also the aspect of being an ally to a whole group in your work or the things that you do. For instance, as I mentioned at the beginning, I really promote the universal design framework, which Helen mentioned as well, that where you're proactive and you design things to be more inclusive. And so when I think of what I do, let's say giving presentations on how to design accessible online learning to online learning instructors and designers, and there are a lot of them in the pandemic. So I give a lot of presentations on that. I feel when I think about it, I'm being an ally to the group of people with disabilities that I'll never meet, will never know that I've been promoting accessibility on their behalf. And it's something that they can't really do as individuals very well. And also those faculty members then, I think, will take on a bit of a role of an ally if they do make their courses proactively designed to be accessible to students with disabilities, even without talking to a person with a disability, except maybe one that's in their class occasionally. So yeah, thinking about those big groups too, and how we can promote more equity and inclusion is a good idea.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Indara, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think, yeah, I definitely have participated in those negotiation discussions like Helen, and I will say that people don't like to talk about numbers, but actually it's super helpful. I wish someone had talked to me about the numbers. I mean, I went around and asked my closest, dearest friends who would feel comfortable, but now I have collected data and I pass it around to the people that are negotiating, because it's super useful. The universities, and I'm sure companies, right, want to make sure they get you for the least amount of money possible. And I think understanding and we're so used to we're finally, got a foot in the door. So we're so grateful for whatever we get. But at the same time, I think that it helps you understand your value as well as a member in STEM.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anthony, any closing thoughts?
No, I don't think, other than I'm very grateful to have been asked to be on this panel. And it's been a great conversation. I've learned a lot here just listening to Indara and Helen and Sheryl, you as well. So I'll end it with that comment for me.
Awesome. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I want to thank all of the panelists for all of your insight, for sharing your experiences, for opening up your heart to our audience. Really appreciate it. And thank you again to Cheryl for giving us the space to have these discussions. So Cheryl, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Paula. And thanks to everyone for being here today. And for those of you who are new to these global-minded sessions, the global-minded community is a few thousand amazing people who are generous leaders, like the inclusive people that have been leading this discussion. So I just want to encourage all of you, if you don't subscribe to our newsletter, all of our different programs are there. And also for all you panelists, I just asked Paula if she'd connect you to our newsletter feature story editor so that we can interview each of you for the newsletter, and 15,000 plus, students and people who work with them can read about the great work you all are doing. So we look forward to doing that. And again, Paula's session will be here next month, and we hope to see you then. And also to mark your calendars for June 22nd, 23rd, 24th. And then Celeste went ahead and put in the chat, if you didn't get to see our Inclusive Leader Awards from a week ago, very inspiring group of people really changing the paradigm very courageously. And I appreciated some of the comments that the participants today made about how certain people in dominant caste will see people as troublemakers. And we value troublemakers. We feel like if you're not, breaking some eggs to make an omelet, you're not making a difference. And one of our higher ed sessions is called Get Comfortable Being Uncomfortable. So I just want to encourage all of you who have been accused of being troublemakers, keep making good trouble. And we need to be able to do that for the kinds of changes that are needed out there, and for us to create a truly equitable world where everybody's voice is heard. So thanks to all of you, and we'll see you next month, and blessings for a wonderful launch to your Thanksgiving week. And we're grateful to work with all of you. Thanks again, Paula. It was a great panel, everyone. Great to meet you guys.